A very warm good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Matthias Aufiku, news editor of the Namibian Sun newspaper. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Evening Review show. Before we get into tonight's business, let's first have a look at tomorrow's headlines. Well, I promised you an exciting evening review edition for tonight. We're joined in studio tonight by Mr. Immanuel Wise, a man of many hats, but today he's wearing the hat of a governance practitioner. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah?
It's a pleasure having me.
No, thank you for heeding our call. Ims, can you just unpack the concept of governance and what a governance practitioner does?
Governance is nothing else than the process, through which an organization, so through which a company is governed, in terms of control and direction. It basically concerns, or it sets, the processes, the practice, the rules, and the systems that must be followed and adhered to in both the operational and strategic execution within the institution toward, the realizations of the institutional mandate. What you would also, or what is also key in as far as governance is concerned, is the fact that it regulates, the relationship between the governors and the governed. And that's to say the role of the board vis-a-vis the role of management. It also encompasses that guides the relationship between the institutions and its various categories of stakeholders. Yeah. So I think in a nutshell, that's what corporate governance entails.
Well, governance has been a buzzword over the years in Namibia. Considering the summary you've just given, can one say that we are on the right track as a country?
Well, I think there would be a mixed reaction to that as to whether we are on track in as far as governance is concerned. So where some would argue that we're not, and some would argue that we are, But since you have invited my personal view, my view is that we are not yet there. So as far as corporate governance is concerned, or as far as anchoring the corporate governance culture in Namibia, we are not yet there. There are a number of things that are still to happen. In terms of systems and processes and institution, you can argue, or arguably those ones are in place, but in terms of our own practices, so of what happens at institutions, what happens at various companies, we still have a long way to go in order to achieve a very sound and solid corporate governance as a nation.
Some would say 31 years later, we're still singing this song. What are those stumbling blocks that are preventing us from really moving to where we ought to be as far as governance is concerned?
I think part of what is contributing to the lack of certainty in as far as the governance process is concerned, particularly within the public enterprises, is the fact that there has been changes in terms of the governance model. You would recall that we were using the dual governance model initially, and we have just recently migrated, from the dual governance model to what is now called the hybrid governance model. Within the change itself, of course, the dual governance model, it wasn't yielding results in as far as accountabilities that institutions are concerned, and in as far as appointment of board, as well as appointments of managing directors and CEO processes were concerned. But also then in the process of changing, of course, there had to be a change management process, and that we are actually just in the face of in the face of change management, where people are still accustoming themselves as to what does this new model of hybrid governance entail, trying to understand, and in the process of seeking an understanding, so much is lagging behind in as far as institutional performance are concerned.
Yeah, you mentioned public enterprises. Do you think the level of governance that's adhered to in our public enterprises, does it have any correlation with the state of our PEs currently? We know many of them are struggling.
Yeah, of course, there is a strong correlations between, the governance process of a public enterprises and the performance of the public enterprises itself. As I have indicated, governance process concerns itself with the performance of the institution. It concerns itself with how things are done in those institutions. It concerns itself with putting in place processes, practice, and systems that should be followed by the management of the public enterprises in the executions of institutional mandate. Now, where there is a gap in the governance process, that becomes a fertile ground, for an untoward practice by management, and that probably explains as to why there are so many allegations of mismanagement, misappropriations of funds at public enterprises by those that are entrusted to manage this institution on a daily basis.
Yes.
Again, another question has to be asked as to who exactly is in charge. You find that in some institution, you really have dominant MDs and manipulative executives to the extent that board would be there in terms of form, but it may be absent in terms of substance and in terms of control. And again, because of this, management get to run away, with whatever they wish at that particular point in time. So there are so many things that we can unpack within the concept of governance, and how then it would take us to the desired state of corporate governance. But of course, another key important issue is that our society generally is just void of ethical leadership. It's really, we have a void of ethical leadership, and this is also then it's then being reflected in our various institutions, and since we are talking about public enterprises, it also finds itself being reflected within the practice of the public enterprises.
Yeah, so ethical leadership. We've seen over the years one of the biggest challenges that public enterprises have faced is that synergy between board and management. Why is that?
I think the conflict between board and management usually emerges as a result of a lack of understanding.
From on whose side?
It can come from either side, such that there is no a clear or concrete understanding as to who is the governor and who is the governed. Now, you find that at times, the governor wants to become the governed. And that again speaks to what I was speaking to earlier, that you find manipulative MDs and manipulating management members who just want to impose their views and their agendas on board. Now, if the board is not solid enough in terms of formations and in terms of substance, you would then find that management would actually start taking the lead. And in the process, because of management's agenda is different from that of the board, So of course, conflict and frictions will emerge in along the process.
Yeah,
but what you would also find is that you also find that the governed who are management do also not understand and appreciate the role of the governor. So the role of the governor is to provide stewardship, to provide oversight over the organization, and make sure that the things are done in transparent and ethical manner. Yeah. And the moment the governed do not understand that role, again, inherently, the conflict or the friction is likely to again arises between the two parties.
You mentioned the issue of the governed and the governor having two different agendas. How does that come about if both ought, or at least are expected to serve the same institution, same mandate, strategic mandate, of course? So how does the different agendas come into play?
Your question borders on the justification of governance. Basically, what you're asking is, why should we bother with governance if people are in an institution and they are to, to move in the same direction? Now, it's inherently because of that people are human beings, and at times, if processes are not in place, one's personal interest will take over the institutional interest, such that one will be pushing for his or her personal interest at the expenses of the institution. Now, the governance process is an insulation against that, against the pursuit of personal interest at the expenses of the institutional interest or national interest. And that's primarily why part of what governance emphasizes is that people should have integrity. So that when they have integrity, they are able and capable of distinguishing between their personal interest as well as the interest of the institutions or that of the nation. Now, because of the thin line that exists in terms of balancing the act between the two, you would find that those that are driven by personal interest would disregard all those governance processes that may be in place, in chase of their personal interest. So, and that's really why then you find that people are not pushing in the same direction, or pulling in the same direction, rather.
One of the issues that also sort of took precedence over the years is the issue of, you spoke of ethical leadership, ethics, but then there are certain legal setups within institutions where you have a situation where ethically it's wrong, but legally it's right. How do you ensure that these two are really balanced out? You spoke of integrity also, but if I do something that's legally correct, whether it's ethically wrong or right, there's nothing you can do to me.
Correct. That you would generally find a thin lines between legality and and morality, or or ethics, as an examples. What ethic entail basically, it entails a set of rules that has been agreed upon by the collective and that everybody is expected to comply with. So that's why you would find that most of the institutions, they have the code of ethics that regulates what are they do and they don't within the institution. Okay. Now, the moment, those rules has been agreed upon, so they any contact that is within the framework of those rules or set of rules then becomes the legal base upon which a lawful and a legal actions can be conducted. So the governance process tries then to make sure that the thin line between the two is not a derailing factor in terms of the performance of the institution. Yes.
So code of ethics, well and good, it might exist, but we've seen a lot of board decisions that have been taken where you perhaps could see that this is not in the interest of, say, perhaps the shareholders of the public entity, which are eventually the taxpayers. But then on the legal leg, so what I'm actually trying to ask is, how do you ensure that the two are in harmony? So because now there's this difference, and it's being used when it's convenient, I'll be ethical. When it's not convenient for my interests, will just make sure I'm legally correct, and ethics can go out of the window.
Okay, perhaps first let me address as to whose interest do boards serve. Board do not necessarily serve the interest of shareholders. But of course, in their decision-making process, they have to give regard to the legitimate expectation of the shareholder. And of course, to the views that the shareholder may express. Boards are primarily and essentially expected to act in the best interest of the institution. Okay? And in so doing, they take into account the feelings, the expectations, and the perceptions of various stakeholders, including the shareholder. Now, as I have indicated, so the moment the code of ethics has been agreed upon by or approved by the board of that institution, that code of conduct become part of the regulatory framework of that specific institution, such that, and mind you, the code of ethics are formulated taking into account any relevant legal provisions there may be. Code of conduct would, for instance, not be infringing upon the basic human rights as a constitutional right that is guaranteed for every person and every citizen. So they take that into account. So in the end, these are become two complementary piece of regulatory or regulatory instrument. So they are not necessarily going opposite one another. So it then surfaces to say that what is legal in the context of that specific institution would be what is regarded as ethical. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And as we move to the last leg, one of the media houses reported earlier this week that the public enterprise minister was a bit worried that our professionals are not keen on applying to serve on boards of public enterprises. And political interference is one thing he mentioned. Well, what do you think are some of the factors that are hampering professionals to be keen to join boards and serve their country?
There can be a number of factors. What you would find out there is that one, there is just no incentive in as far as, or some may probably think that there is no incentive in as far as serving on board is concerned. Some would probably think that, and this is true, that board requires time, or board membership requires time, that those that are serving on the board, if they are indeed to serve the best interest of the institution, they need to make time. Some may be that they merely do not have time to assign to additional engagement and additional activity in addition to, to what they are already busy with. Some may merely look at it that there are a lot of, probably a lot of infights in the board. And because of that, I can tell you now that it comes at a cost. what you would see is that if you find that there are individuals that are incompetent, if you find that there are individuals that are unethical and are engaging in dubious undertakings at institutional level, those individuals will be determined at all costs to also equally make sure that they fight against any question or any questions of governance or any request for accountability or demand for accountability.
Yeah.
Now, because of that, your name will not escape untainted. So it will go with a mark, even if what you are doing is in the best interest of the institution. It will go with a mark because everyone in there, will defend his positions rightly or wrongly, and all these things can actually disincentivize those that may want to be members of the board, but because of the cost associated with being the members of the board, they would probably not choose to partake in the applications of board memberships. But there may be also those that have perception, rightly or wrongly, that you can throw in as many applications as possible. Maybe you're not coming out, merely just to be appointed as a board member. If you try it once or twice, the next time you may not try again, especially where the Ministry of Public Enterprises doesn't even bother giving feedback to people that have applied. You apply and it's like people have not received your application. So these are some of the things that we need to look at as we seek to improve our process in as far as the board recruitment or board members recruitment process are concerned.
Okay. Wise, just a parting shot perhaps, what message in terms of ethical leadership, what would you like to leave our viewers with tonight?
I think what is important is that we need to take the concept of ethical leadership very seriously, such that we should demand, as citizens of this country, that people that are seeking to hold public offices and seeking to hold offices in public enterprises, they should be subjected somehow to ethical hygiene sort of assessment. It's true. They should.
What would that entail?
They should be subjected to that. I'm telling you, if you take any examples of what happens in the recruitment process, and you look at any assessment, assuming there is a psychometric assessment that has been done upon the candidates, the finding of psychometric assessment are usually not far from who the really person is. And what you need to realize is that, a person doesn't rise above the limitations of his own or her own character. So those assessments must be taken very seriously in the recruitment of our executives at our public enterprises and for any public office, such that also this trend that is, I think it has been common at the University of Namibia, where interview for executive positions are subjected to public interviews, and public is allowed to ask questions and also to object to the candidacy of a particular person. It's also a process that is used in the recruitment of the commissioner for the Electoral Commission, that any persons or any political parties can object actually to a candidacy of a particular person because they think this particular individual lacks integrity. And it's not just speculative sort of preposition. It's people coming with evidence that this individual is unethical at all. He lacks, you know, integrity and cannot be entrusted with such institution. I mean, or such a role. I think we really need to see how we build that, or we popularize that in our recruitment processes. You know, for the better of the nation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Immanuel, thank you very much for your insight. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was good having me.
Good.
Yep.